It's Behind the Headlines on WLIW. It's our opportunity to sit down with the award-winning journalists who cover the East End of Long Island and do a bit of a deeper dive into the week's news. I'm Joe Shaw. I'm a consulting editor at the Express News Group. We publish the Southampton Press, the East Hampton Press, the Sag Harbor Express, the website 27east.com, and Express Magazine. My co-host is Bill Sutton. He is the editor-in-chief at the Express News Group. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Joe. Hey, everybody.
Panelists this week, Beth Young of the East End Beacon. Hey, Beth. And Denise Civiletti of Riverhead Local. Hey, Denise.
How you doing?
It's just us this week, just the four of us.
Just us chickens.
No
Yep.
guests, just the four of us. So let's talk.
So
We want to talk about. Let's talk about something that just happened. You guys are coming off a meeting today of the Riverhead Town Board, correct? And it was involved the Long Island Science Center. Tell us about that meeting. You guys were both in attendance virtually, I'm guessing, right?
Denise was there in person.
I was there. It
So
was,
we'll see if you had different takes on it.
It was interesting. I suspect we probably do not. I mean, I think, I might have heard some kind of under the breath comments and gotten to see some like nods and, those kind of verbal clues that you don't get when watching it on video.
That's true.
But,
that is one of the benefits of being there live.
This was kind of a brouhaha over the Long Island Science Center, which
so give us a little bit of background.
That
on
organization, it's a not-for-profit organization. It purchased this property on what then became the town square in, I think, 2019, something like that. Does that sound right? And there was a whole big press conference. The supervisor at the time, Yvette Aguiar, said that this was like a heart transplant for downtown Riverhead, because I think it was on Valentine's Day, this press conference. They bought this kind of dilapidated building that they were going to redo into, a really nice facility. They were going to have a planetarium on the roof, all the like pretty elaborate plans. It was going to be expensive to build.
And
But to like renovate and
right in the
create
middle of Riverhead, right on the town square.
And everybody, I think, agrees it's a great organization. They do a lot of nice programs and stuff. At the time, they were renting space in the Summerwind building on Peconic Avenue. Anyway, they really have not done anything that's visible at the site. They, according to town board members who are interested in, the town threatened last year to take the property by eminent domain. There's some discussion of there was a developer who remains nameless, but it's not hard to figure out who I think it probably was, that said that if he would buy this building, renovate it to what they wanted, and then lease it back to them, they just haven't been able to do anything. The town board members say that these folks are having. They kind of admitted this today that they don't have the money, like they haven't really, amassed the money, and they need to get a bridge loan because they got some grants, which are reimbursements. They have to spend the money in order to get it, which puts anybody in a kind of a bad spot, but especially a not-for-profit. And so last year, apparently, they came to the town board and said, and I'm saying apparently, I know they did based on Alex reporting, but if you were there, maybe you could speak to that. But folks were saying today, look, you promised all of this last year and nothing has happened. What have you done? And they were discussing what they've done and, what they've been doing to raise money and get their plans together and everything. And it was all kind of, nothing too concrete. No pun intended.
Beth, what did you see?
It got pretty heated. Denise Merrifield, councilwoman in Riverhead, is a former assistant DA and prosecutor, and boy, she was doing her thing.
Break them over the coals.
I was thinking, well, I wouldn't want to be a defendant in your courtroom right now, and that's, I'm sure, what they felt like. And it got the construction manager who was there, he kind of got his back up, sort of, and kind of started going jab for jab with her. It would appear that a majority of the board, well, I guess it's going to depend on the supervisor, because Councilman Bob Kern doesn't seem to be in favor of taking action to, take the title to the land by eminent domain, and the supervisor really hasn't said one way or the other what he thinks about this. I mean, he's coming into this kind of late in the game. It's hard to tell. Like, he just hasn't, as far as I know, he hasn't really expressed an opinion about this publicly. Anyway, I haven't heard it. So, but it seems they're going to have a resolution on the agenda on Tuesday's meeting that that would authorize the commencement of that action.
Even though he said they can come back to next Thursday's work session and the same argument over again, I guess.
So yeah, I mean, he did. I mean, they're putting this on the agenda Tuesday to vote on, apparently, but Supervisor Halpin said he invited them to come back Thursday to talk some more, and he seemed to say something about he wanted them to come back every week. I heard that too.
Yeah,
I didn't listen to the recording, but so I don't know where that goes, but it seems like it's set up for him to be the swing vote in this. So, because Councilwoman Merrifield is clearly, in favor of starting this proceeding now. And I think Councilwoman Joanne Waskey is right there with her. They both said, time's up. We're not doing this anymore. They've got a lot of things to coordinate there with the town square,
What would be the alternative if they don't go forward with this project?
Find someone else to develop it. I mean,
They'd be back to square one.
the point they keep making is that this is like this decrepit old building that looks like heck, and it's not going to be an activation. It's a brick wall basically on the town square that they're trying to turn into kind of a plaza, and a place that they keep using the word, a buzzword now, activation. It's going to be activated. So they want to activate the space, but this is brick wall there. And I mean, Councilman Ken Rothwell started asked some questions about why, you put this property, you've had this listed for sale over the last couple of years. They have. It's been listed on the LoopNet website. And he's like, and the answer they got from their fundraising consultant is Christine Kempner, who's a former community development agency director in town of Riverhead, former town employee. And the only answer he got from them was, she said, I haven't listed anything. But in fact, it was listed, and Larry Oxman told us at the time, well, something like keeping options open. I'm not sure. I haven't looked back at that, but, so what's that about? If you really are committed to doing this, why would you, want to sell it? It might be that there's this potential developer in play. I don't know.
Let me see. Beth, do you have any insights here?
No, I mean, do you think that potential developer is Petroselli or?
Yes, I do. I think I have heard that, that he was the one that offered to buy it and lease it back to them after doing the renovation. Honestly, that I don't know what the terms might have been, but that, for an organization that doesn't have the ability to do that and raise the capital and do it on their own, apparently, that may be a good option. But I don't know. However, the town and the master developer over there, they need to be able to move forward with doing the grading, putting in the drainage, stormwater handling, flood mitigation. I mean, there's a lot involved with the site. There is a lot of coordination that needs to take place. You know what I mean? They've got to talk to each other and be, frank with each other. I think that seems to be part of the issue here. They need to have kind of like very frank, forthright discussions over, okay, if we're going to do this, how do we get this done? What needs to happen? And where are you at, really?
And why have
So,
conversations not been happening this year?
So is this a case where the Long Island Science Center just kind of got out over its skis too much?
I mean, potentially, I guess. I mean, I don't really know. They owned a building on West Main Street where today Peconic Crossing is on that property. They didn't own that entire. Maybe they did. I don't recall, but they owned at least a portion of that property, and they sold it. And so they got some money, and they then took over. They leased this space. Maybe I think it might have been donated actually from Bridgehampton National Bank at the time. It was leased space on Peconic Avenue, and then when that lease was up, they had nowhere to go. Meanwhile, they had already purchased this property. I think they purchased it for cash, and I'm not 100% sure about that. I don't believe that they show any mortgages. I was looking at their 990s, and I don't think they show any mortgages. So they have this asset that's worth some money, and then they're looking for financing, looking to leverage that asset, looking for financing to do these renovations.
Did they ever give any figure for what it would cost to do the renovations?
Well, the plans have changed a number of times. I mean, they've kind of like scaled back the plans. So no, I don't know that they like certainly the most recent plan that they floated. I don't think they've put a dollar figure on that. They're talking about doing it in phases. I mean, it seems like they're making a good faith effort to get this done, but like again, there's this coordination problem. So. And it seems like at least some members of the board are out of patience with it. The reality is that it's right in the center of like the commercial strip on Main Street, right? It's like right opposite the Suffolk Theater, this town square. Petrocelli is buying or bought the building that they just now tore down. He's moving it's not the sale hasn't closed yet, but they have a lease agreement, and he's relocating the Arts Council Gallery building, and that's also for flood mitigation, but to also give the space that's required for the construction of this boutique hotel with condos on the top floor, and then he's going to build this plaza. And it's supposed to have this building that's, an activation on the opposite side of the. So, I mean, there's no question that it's a very crucial location for the purpose of everything that they've got that $10 million grant, right, to make a reality. I mean, so I think that the need is real. I think that the urgency of it is coming to a head. So something's got to give one way or the other. And town board members feel like they've been just sort of kind of like dragged along without any real resolution.
This is Behind the Headlines on WLIW. I'm Joe Shaw. My co-host is Bill Sutton. We're with the Express News Group. Our panelists this week are Beth Young of the East End Beacon and Denise Civiletti of Riverhead Local. Bill, we want to talk a little bit about a story in our papers this week too, and it's one that sort of involves our newspaper a little bit in the fact that it involves our headquarters, our longtime headquarters on Windmill Lane in Southampton Village, but we're only tangentially involved. There's a lawsuit that's been filed now over this proposal. Southampton Village wants to put in a sewage treatment facility on a piece of property there. What's the dispute here?
Yeah, so the village wants to put the sewage treatment plant behind the ambulance barn on Windmill Lane, next door to the building that we're in at 135 Windmill Lane. The current dog park, the Lola Prentice Memorial Park, that would be used for underground leaching from the leach fields from the sewage treatment plant. In order for the village to do that, then they would need to move the dog park. And we're talking about moving the dog park to, again, the property that we're at 135 Windmill Lane, to build a new dog park. The some neighbors of the dog park and people who use the dog park are not happy with the plan. They're claiming that that in the 1962 deed, when the school district signed the property over to the village, it stipulated that Lola Prentice Park, where the dog park is now, would always be used for recreational or educational uses. There was also a 2019 court injunction after the village had been using part of the park for, I think, for some car storage from, impound storage, that type of thing that neighbors had fought. When the property was dedicated, it was dedicated to be a park. Now, under state law, you can alienate a piece of parkland, which means remove it from as deemed parkland, if you can substitute in another piece of property to replace that parkland. And that's
It's got to
what the
be a
village
comparable property, right? It's got to
right.
be.
I mean, that's what the village is hoping to do. There's legislation in Albany right now before the Assembly and the Senate to do just that, to alienate the one piece of property and substitute it with the other. Now, the neighbors are saying that they're not comparable pieces of property, that the property, Lola Prentice Park, where the dog park is right now, is about twice the size. The park measures, it's almost 2,500 acres. While the
2,500 square feet, you mean?
I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Where, I'm sorry, 2.5 acres. I'm reading it
There
right.
you go. There you go.
Almost 2.5 acres. While the proposed new dog park site, where the press building is only 1.1 acre. So the argument is going to be, is that a comparable trade? The state legislation, dictating alienation talks about comparable. It doesn't talk about size. It talks about assessed value of the properties, that they have to be valued comparatively. I don't know if there's been, if the village has come through and had the two properties appraised. I imagine the property where the press building or the express building is right now has been appraised because it's been for sale for a number of months now. I imagine it was, but I don't know if that's an official appraisal for the village or whatever. And I don't know how you appraise a piece of park property that's undevelopable. Does that become comparable? So, I guess that most likely this will all come down to a judge's decision. I would think that the legislation in Albany will be approved. We spoke to our reporter Dan Stark spoke to Assemblyman Tommy John Schiavone, and he said that that stuff usually gets passed pretty pro forma if that's what the village wants, and the village certainly wants this deal to go through. The underlying point here is the village has been searching for a spot to put a sewage treatment plant for years and years and years. And every time they come up with a possible place to put it, there's been objections or there's reasons why it can't go there. The sewage treatment plant is going to be a game changer for Southampton Village, for the downtown business district. It's going to allow a lot more wet uses, bars and restaurants. It's going to allow for more residential uses in the business district. It's just going to it's going to provide for a lot of, a better renovation of downtown. If you think of what West Hampton Beach was able to accomplish, in recent years, a lot of that was due to, to bringing the sewers in there and what they've been, doing since the Main Street revitalization there just continues to grow and grow because you have that sewer district in place. You're looking at the same thing in Southampton. They're running out of places to put this.
They have had trouble finding a location, right? That's the problem.
Absolutely. There have been a number of locations proposed over the last, decade, and for one reason or another, none of them worked out. One property was outside the village, and people complained, neighbors complained that they shouldn't have to house a sewage treatment plant for the village if they weren't living in the village. But there's just all kinds of problems finding a place that would be suitable for this. And this just seemed like, in recent weeks, the answer to everybody's problem, except that maybe they weren't considering, the neighbors and the deed to this park property and what it was intended when it was deeded over to the village.
I hasten to mention too, by the way, just real quickly, that the Express News Group is based in that building, doesn't actually own the building. We're actually tenants in that building, and this doesn't affect us in the sense of we are fully aware that that building was up for sale, and we're looking for other locations for headquarters. So we don't really have a horse in this necessarily. This isn't the Express News Group's building per se. But Beth, you were going to say?
Is the leach field, is everything on that site completely underground, or are there?
It's proposed to be an underground leach field at the site where the park is now.
And is there a reason they can't have anything on top of it? Or I guess they need to access it.
Yeah, I don't know the mechanics of it. No.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
actually, so in other words, maybe put the dog park on top of the leaching fields. Yeah. I don't know.
A lot of leaching going on there.
May not be an option.
I know that people love that dog park, and we wrote about it. It had its 10-year anniversary recently, a year or two ago. People who go to that dog park love that dog park and feel really invested in it. I don't know that that's the same people that are filing the suit. I think the suit is more neighbors of the dog park who are equally invested in the property of living next door to a park, right? Bought their property with the idea that they would always have a park next door and not, the mechanics of a sewage plant.
And it's the same old question about living next to a sewage treatment facility. Most officials will assure them that they're not going to have negative impacts of living right next to it. It won't have smells. It won't have issues like that. But most people would prefer not to live next to the leaching fields if they can avoid that. And I think that's, as you said, Bill, they've had a couple of sites that have come up over the years, and they just can't seem to get past this stage. This looked like a promising one, but this lawsuit kind of puts everything on hold for now, right?
It will, and if you know how these things work, this could tie the plan up for years. I think the issue is, I think they filed an Article 78 suit, but I don't know that works because there has been no decision made yet. Usually an Article 78, is challenging a municipal decision. It's challenging, I think, the state legislation, but that hasn't been passed or approved yet. So we'll see how that plays out in court. Certainly, though, they could get an injunction while their concerns are being raised, and that was that there was that injunction from 10 years ago when the village was using the property improperly, and it is still standing. And that injunction said that that property could only be used for recreation or educational uses. I think that they could probably have a judge come in and say the same thing, although I believe, and I'm not an attorney, and maybe Denise could lend her expertise to this. If the state legislation passes and the alienation laws pass and those properties are transferred, I think that would trump any existing court orders.
Any familiarity with that, Denise?
I mean, not exactly, but I think that if that's done legislatively, then it would render this action like moot, really.
I have a question. When they were talking about building the sewage treatment plant in Flanders, there was in Riverside, there was a lot of talk about the plant that they were building there being very similar to one that's already existing over by the middle school or near Town Hall in Southampton Village.
That may be the one that
that's a hospital.
Southampton Hospital uses. The Stony Brook Southampton Hospital uses. Yeah, there is a facility there. Most people aren't even aware of it.
Walk right up to it and not know that it's an STP. I mean, there's no smell, there's no noise, there's no, there's nothing, and but it only serves the hospital. It doesn't serve the surrounding community, surrounding area. Um, and I think Joe's right. I think the modern plants aren't like. I mean, you think about the one in Sag Harbor is maybe a little bit different. You know when that's operating, or you know when it's not operating well, I guess, or whatever. And there's always, there's a little bit of an aroma that comes from that. It's an older system, and it's a huge, it's much, it's a huge system. I don't think they're thinking of anything to that scale. In Southampton Village, it would be a bit smaller. I imagine comparable to the hospital plan or whatever they're building in Flanders.
Right.
Big project for the village. I mean, it means a lot to the village to try and find the location. I think everybody's full speed ahead on trying to get a sewage treatment plant in place, but finding a location has been the big holdup. So
Yeah.
this is going to be something the village will be pushing hard for. We'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. Beth, I wanted to ask you. You had mentioned there was some movement about some affordable housing issues up your way. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe it's the lack of movement might be.
No, sure.
Or there are a lot of discussions going on. Southold has not implemented its community housing plan yet. And Greenport Village is also working on some community housing initiatives, and getting them to dovetail is a little bit difficult because the people who run the town and the people who run the village are very different personality-wise. So the Greenport Village has been planning to apply for a state grant, or for the Long Island Housing Partnership, to study multifamily units within the village, but they can't get this technical assistance grant unless they have a total of 50 units that they're going to be studying. And they were hoping to use actually a village-owned property, a Greenport village-owned property that's in Southampton, that's in Southold town. And it's actually the site of the outflow pipe for the village's sewage treatment plant. So there's a lot of debate. The town says it's parkland because it's been used as parkland, but the village says, well, it's not in the deed that it's parkland. If you look at a zoning map, it says municipal wastewater use already. But they need the town to sign off on this technical assistance form in order for the village to be able to even get help from the state. And they have several other properties within the village of Greenport that are that they really want to study. Some of them are right downtown. Some of them could provide a significant amount of multifamily housing within the village of Greenport, but Southold Town's really been dragging its feet on this. Concurrently, Southold Town is the municipality on the North Fork that collects the community housing fund money. So they could use it within Greenport Village, but Southold Town is administering the fund. And the town kind of dragged its feet for a bunch of years and had to deal with a lot of issues with civil service to hire somebody to administer this fund. And they finally got somebody on board last August. And she's just been going piece by piece through their community housing plan, trying to set up a framework so it works and is fair. And they're not just like writing checks to developers to go put things wherever they want, or, doing this in some sort of equitable fashion. So that's taking time. So there was a big forum in Mattituck on Monday, packed house. A bunch of people had a ton of questions. And as you hear where you guys are reporting as well, like accessory dwelling units have been pitched on the East End as like the solution to a lot of affordable housing problems for a long time. These are they're either like a section of your own home or an outbuilding that you could house somebody who's working here, who might be like a single person who needs a little place to live. But very few of them have been built anywhere. There's a lot of red tape. The state has a program called the ADU Plus One program that provides like a little over $100,000 in funding for these, but a lot of times that also comes back to septic, because you have to upgrade septic systems to the new nitrogen reducing septic systems.
And that's a big stumbling block for most properties on the East End.
Yeah, and that's expensive. I mean, it's a minimum of $30,000 or $40,000, so that's cutting right into your the money you have to build an ADU.
Yeah, the numbers just kind of don't add up for property owners, even though they're allowed to do this. And as you say, Beth, I think it's seen as kind of a magic bullet in the sense that it would add a lot of very affordable housing for work, the workforce, without adding a ton of density in the sense of you'd have more and more, you know, you'd be able to add living units that would really be more small units for working people rather than families. But despite the fact that they're available, nobody really wants to take that jump.
It can be a huge expense, I think, and and I think if your idea is that you're going to build an ADU on your property, um, as a way to try to make a little extra money, you're not going to make it back, especially if they're affordable. You're not going to make back your investment very quickly, if at all.
Right,
I
and
think
that's one of the things the community housing fund is going to be used for in order to help people get there. They need to iron out the details of how that money would be administered and how they'd make sure that it's being rented affordably. I mean, there's also like a lot of people are doing this already. It's
yeah.
just not legal. So why would you go to the trouble of trying to telling on yourself to the town and getting all the permits? And the
Well,
only
maybe
answer
that's
is
what.
that it will be safe. And that's not a convincing economic argument for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Well, maybe the community housing fund could be used to help legalize some of these ADUs if they exist illegally already. I think there's certainly there's certainly a piece in the puzzle when you look at addressing affordable housing on the East End. I think it's good that they're spread out and you're not concentrating, like Joe said, you're not concentrating density in one area. You can spread them out, but at the same time, I feel like the towns have gone through over the last 50 years, um, pains to maintain zoning and density in certain areas and upzoning certain areas, and as an environmental effort to protect groundwater and to overall protect the environment. And then all of a sudden you want to start sprinkling in all these rental units in the middle of it, and whether it's concentrated density or not, you're increasing density in a certain area. And I think that there's a question of that too. You have to, I guess it becomes a matter of weighing, what's more important on a certain day, providing more housing or protecting the environment.
Well,
And maybe you do
well,
both. I mean,
I think that the history of sort of upzoning is what it's really led to out here is monstrous houses,
right,
which is
exactly.
not necessarily helping the environment. It's not. So I mean, yeah, I mean, historically, a lot of houses in the hamlet centers or in the villages, Sag Harbor and Greenport are great examples. There were a lot of multi-family houses. A lot of them look like single-family homes, but there's like 3 or 4 units in them, and those have been converted back into single-family units, and that's housing stock that's now lost. But also just I mean, if these 2-acre plots with big houses on them don't build neighborhoods.
Right.
It's
All the nitrogen that gets put into the ground with grass being fertilized and water consumption, like big lots like that. That stuff comes along with that.
yeah.
And I mean, you see this in the context of Governor Kathy Hochul just recently launched her Let Them Build campaign, which was designed to once again sort of supersede local rules and allow more building to take place. It's not necessarily something that's going to be helpful on the East End, where you'd really just end up with a lot more expensive properties being built, most likely. This affordable housing thing is complicated, Beth. It's
Yeah.
hard to it's hard to find solutions that and make we all know what we need, but it's hard to get there.
And Southwoods is in the middle of a really massive zoning update. And I think one of the big criticism is that this is like a once in a generation opportunity to really make it so that there's zoning for this type of thing, this type of the way people used to live in 1,200, 1,500 square foot houses, in neighborhoods where you knew your neighbor. Maybe it was inconvenient. You had to talk over the hedge and tell them to turn the music down or whatever, but it's enough housing for people who live here and work here. Anyway, we have a big story up, big meeting on Monday. There's going to continue to be a bunch of big meetings on this coming up. There's actually one on April 17th that I believe the North Fork Environmental Council is running. Is about just this issue, how you balance affordable housing and the environment.
All right. This is Behind the Headlines on WLIW. I'm Joe Shaw. My co-host is Bill Sutton. We're with the Express News Group. Beth Young is with the East End Beacon. Denise Civiletti is with Riverhead Local. Denise, you have a story this week about the Riverhead Town Anti-Bias Task Force. And we call it Behind the Headlines. There's a lot going on behind the headlines here, right? Tell us the story a little bit about this.
Well, the former chairperson of this anti-bias task force, who was named to the task force and named as chairperson in 2023 when the town board decided the task force needed to be revamped. And they really didn't make any bones about the reason why. The liaison to the task force was Ken Rothwell, Councilman Ken Rothwell, and they clearly did not appreciate the programming that the Anti-Bias Task Force was doing. He said that well, not to be political, but there are too many said Caucasian female or women Democrats on the Anti-Bias Task Force.
Not to be political.
Not to be political.
No.
But I mean, they were kind of doing sort of these like progressive programs. And I mean, I think that almost by definition, an anti-bias task force is going to get involved in programs that people who are more conservative would consider progressive.
Sure.
Because it's issues of bias based on race, based on ethnicity, based on sexual orientation, gender issues, that sort of thing.
Multicultural activities.
Multicultural, DEI, you name it. They're like worlds apart here, so there was a friction there, let's say. And so they took a bunch of people, took several people off the anti-bias task force and put new people on. And this happened in the context of the anti-bias task force was trying to get money that was budgeted for them, which was very minimal to begin with, to use toward the purchase of books for school libraries, books that had been selected by the school librarians, that some people somewhere on the town board or somewhere, I don't know, thought were not appropriate for students. So this ties into the whole thing that was going on more at that time about, school libraries and books for kids.
Mm-hmm.
So it was multi-layered. But anyway, so they put new people on the anti-bias task force, including this chairman, who is a Black man who has been a registered Republican for a long time, and was kind of tight with the Riverhead Republican Council people and stuff like that. Anyway, he resigned from the anti-bias task force in February, and he just said that he was looking to do other things. He didn't really give a reason. And then a couple weeks ago, he contacted me to talk about why he was really resigning, he said. And it had to do with what he said were controls being put on the anti-bias task force and what they could do, and programming, kind of the controls that it was obvious they were seeking to, I thought, a couple of years ago. But he just, kind of said he couldn't take it anymore, and he felt like he was being silenced, and that's why he resigned. And, by the way, these other people on the task force, there's other people that feel like me. And so I started making phone calls, and I interviewed at least 4 of the people on this task force who, in fact, corroborated what he was saying. And the former chairperson of the task force, longtime member, you know, to return my call and said, you know, in fact, I'm resigning for the same reasons. And she, so I'm like, okay. Anyway, so I published a story about this. And he was, you know, you could tell he was genuinely upset by what had gone down. He, I think the thing that triggered this for him was when the president posted or reposted a video on his social media platform that ended with the depiction of the former President Barack Obama and Mrs. Obama being depicted as like gorillas in a forest, which is like one of the oldest kind of racist memes you could think of. He posted that the former chairman, Mark McLaughlin, posted on his own Facebook page, "We are not apes. That is insulting." And he caught flack for that, and his employer asked him to take it down. And then feeling like he, you know, like, okay, this is my employer. He complied, but it really, really affected him and upset him. And
that's not a particularly controversial response.
No, one would think. You'd be surprised, though. I mean, you know. Anyway, I don't know. So I reached out to the councilwoman who's a liaison and asked her to comment. I sent her a list of pretty specific questions, asking her to respond to this, that, and the other thing about, you know, how the task force is run and what kind of, did she instruct people that these kinds of things shouldn't be, because they said, you know, they were told you're not allowed to mention ICE or immigration. You can't talk about, you know, we don't want you participating in things that they had participated in that related to LGBTQ issues through like music at the East End Arts Council during the Community Mosaic Festival and stuff like that. So it was quite extensive. And I got back a statement from her by email, which didn't respond to my questions. And then I wrote back to her again, asking her to respond to some statements made by the founder of the Butterfly Effect Project, who you may recall last year, that organization had some really vile, upsetting, racist comments and memes, same kind of gross things, posted on their own Facebook page when they were advertising an event that was honoring some young teenage girls for their academic achievements and stuff. And so, I wrote back to the councilwoman and said, you know, if you want to respond to this, this is what Tia Fulford said, which was that she felt like she went there seeking like support and assistance to the Antibodies Task Force, and she said reprimanded, and was told that maybe they really need to learn how to complain, and got lectured about the difference between a hate crime and hate speech, and it sounded like it was a very unpleasant experience and something that was quite upsetting to Tia Fulford, and you know, in any event, I asked if she wanted to respond to that, and I never heard from her. So after I published this story, including her statement, today at the work session, she read a statement, quite a lengthy statement, saying things about Mark McLaughlin, the former Antibodies Task Force chairperson, and saying that, you know, he wanted the Antibodies Task Force to be more like a political action committee, and he was like campaigning against Trump's, not campaigning, but like wanted them to take a position against the president's DEI executive order, and which, you know, she just said all this stuff, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, gee, I wonder, why didn't you tell me any of this
when you asked.
when I asked these questions? I got nothing out of you from that about that. And, so here we are in a public session. She's kind of attacking, not kind of, I mean, she's kind of attacking Mark McLaughlin. And, at the same time, sort of discrediting my reporting because it's like what I reported, she said, is nothing like what she's saying publicly on, the TV camera.
Wow, that can be frustrating.
It's bizarre. So that's my behind the headline story for today.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
people are afraid to just to say the full truth about what's going on, which is a really horrible place to be in.
Let's acknowledge the irony that this is all circulating around an anti-bias task force.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, all
Which-
this stuff would be right in the wheelhouse of every other anti-bias task force on the North.
Yeah. I mean, nobody, it's really not, and it actually, I mean, it inspired me to write a column about my own response to that video. As, a white woman who has the privilege of being able to like get angry about it and fume about it, because I was, but then has the privilege to not really say anything about it. And I just did it was kind of gut wrenching for me talking to him about it, because I did a lot of reflecting about like being silent and what it means to be silent, and why we must speak out, things like that. And much to my surprise, I really was only minimally attacked on social media for voicing that comment. Although we did have an advertiser cancel and with the words, "I don't like your politics," because I guess saying it's wrong to say we are not apes.
Which is really the issue that you're talking about here. Yeah.
I don't know.
Strange times.
What
We
a-
live in strange times, no question about it.
But that's all right. That's a good sword to die on.
So speaking of politics, Bill, this week we did have a story that there are two folks who've stepped forward now to be the Democratic candidates to challenge U.S. Representative Nick LaLota in the first district. You have two men who have lined up to challenge, right? Who are they?
Lucas Venturis of Northport and Christopher Gallant of Amity Harbor, pretty much west side of the district. I don't know a lot about them other than what we've reported. Venturis is younger. He's 25 years old, but he's got a little bit of a background in politics. He's worked on past political campaigns, including remember Nancy Goroff, who ran for that position. He worked for her campaign. The other guy, Gallant, he's a career military guy. He's 36. He's been in the military since he was 17, and he's currently a Black Hawk pilot, working for the Air National Guard. I'm not sure if that's in West Hampton or not. Both seem like they're very, very capable, very interested. We'll see if they're going to have to run a primary. The parties haven't come out and endorsed. The party committees haven't endorsed either of these two guys, I don't think yet. And I wonder if there will be other candidates coming forward. It's starting to get a little late, but you know that this is usually a fairly big field, Joe, before the primaries. There's always 4 or 5 candidates who want to get involved. Although, maybe with the beating that Democrats have been taking, the last few years, maybe they're going to be less interested
In the first district, that is. And that's interesting because the first district has always been it's swung back and forth over the years, but it's been solidly Republican in the recent.
Since the district lines changed, like 2014 or so. Did they change again?
They changed
They did,
back,
but
didn't they?
But it didn't make a difference in the last race. Nick LaLota won fairly comfortably, as I recall. We should mention, while we have a moment, that it sounds like the former Congressman Lee Zeldin might be getting a promotion this week. Beth, we just heard. Actually, we're recording this on Thursday, and we just heard that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has lost her job, and Lee Zeldin is in line for that.
quite possible. And this might, if we anything we say today might be old news by the time you hear this.
We have no
But-
idea when this
but
is airing. Yeah.
we're the meteoric rise of Lee Zeldin is the next opera we're writing, I guess.
Yes. He's been a solid ally of the president in the EPA. So, and just 2 days earlier, I think the New York Times had suggested that Trump might be ready to make this move. The president kind of characteristically denied it, and then a day later actually did pull the trigger, and has moved on from Pam Bondi. So, interesting stuff.
Zeldin
Yes.
was a member of his defense impeachment team in the Senate. Remember, he
That's right.
was on his defense team.
That's absolutely correct.
There's well, strong bond there.
Joe,
are-
can I talk about the opera?
Yes, I was just about to say we're about to run out of time, but I definitely want to hear a story about a friend of ours on the show, and he's been on the show at various points, Steve Wick. Tell us about the big news he's got.
Yeah, so Steve Wick, Pulitzer Prize winning reporter, worked for Newsday for many years and also for the Suffolk Times up here as the executive editor for a while. He lives in Cutchogue, and he had written a book a couple of years ago called All That Remains about the last farm labor camp on the North Fork, where historically on the North Fork, a lot of the farm laborers here were Southern Black people who came up north under false pretenses. They thought they'd have better jobs and better lives up here, and they ended up working in these labor camps, grading potatoes and doing things like that. Mostly out here, at least what we know about is about out here in Suffolk County. Steve Wick had knocked on the door of the last of the farm labor camps in Cutchogue in the late 90s, and everybody there told him their life stories, and he learned a lot about them. A lot of them had lost all track of their families, and he helped them find their families back in the South and reunite with them. Very, very passionate story, really, really heartfelt story, and it's being turned now into an opera, a contemporary opera by a group of artists in New York City who came together through the Rites of Spring Music Festival on the North Fork. Steve Wick had attended one of these performances and met a woman named Tanya Burl Torres, who's a choreographer and director, and they were both aficionados of the work of Zora Neale Hurston. And they really shared a lot of stories, and he said, I have a project I'd love for you to turn into an opera, and now she's doing it, and it's going to, the first performance is going to be a works in process performance as part of the music festival at Sylvester Manor on Shelter Island on
Very
July.
exciting stuff. Congratulations
Yeah.
to Steve Wick,
So-
friend of
Yeah,
ours.
that's
No
great.
question.
It's going to be really cool.
So we're out of time. Thank you to you guys, and thank you to those folks out there. We'll be back next time with another edition of Behind the Headlines. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Sure, guys, thanks.